Okay, so we're diving into something that seems like it's everywhere these days. Dopamine fasting. You've been doing your research because you sent over this fascinating literature review. And you're not alone in wanting to figure this out. Is it just hype? Or is this really a genuine path to a better you? So this isn't just some random article we're digging into. This is a deep dive by Desai and like a whole team of medical professionals over in India. They really went all in on combing through all the research out there to give us the full picture. I mean, even the title, A Literature Review on Holistic Well-Being and Dopamine Fasting, an integrated approach. Like it tells you right there that they're taking a balanced, well-rounded approach. But before we jump into the whole like fasting frenzy, let's rewind for just a sec. We hear dopamine thrown around all the time. Oh, it's the feel-good chemical, right? But it's got to be a bit more nuanced than that. Can you give us the lowdown on dopamine and why it matters so much?
Yeah, you're right. Dopamine's not just about, feeling good. Think of it more like your brain's very own motivation system. It's a neurotransmitter, and it plays this huge role in how we go after rewards, how we stay focused, even how we form memories. It's not really about like trying to eliminate dopamine completely. It's more about finding that sweet spot, that balance where it's working with us, not against us.
I like that, finding that sweet spot. So it's like you need that dopamine hit to power through a tough workout or to nail a presentation at work. But then there's that other side, that relentless need it now feeling, the one that has us scrolling endlessly or like craving just one more slice of cake, which brings us to this whole fasting thing. So for anyone listening who's thinking, wait, you want me to fast from a chemical? Break it down for us. What exactly is dopamine fasting and what did this study actually find?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because the name itself can be kind of misleading. You're not actually like depriving your body of all dopamine. It's really more about strategically hitting pause on those super stimulating activities. The ones that send our dopamine levels through the roof. The article highlighted some examples that I think are really relatable, things we can all probably relate to: cutting back on social media, easing up on the video games, even just being mindful of how much processed food we're eating. It's about recognizing how those things, which are often kind of amplified in our modern world, might be throwing our dopamine systems out of whack.
Okay, see, now that makes sense because when I first heard about dopamine fasting, it was all these kind of extreme stories, people locking themselves away like hermits. But this article seems to be landing in a more, shall we say, reasonable place, right? It really does seem like this literature review is trying to bring some balance to what could be, really easy to take to an extreme.
Yeah.
And it's not just theory. They really did go into the research. What does the science say? Does this dopamine fasting actually live up to all the hype?
Well, the research is still pretty new, but some studies are showing some promising results. And that's what I think is so fascinating about this. Like one study found that people who just incorporated a few days a week of a digital detox, things like limiting social media and streaming, they saw like a 15% improvement in their ability to focus on tasks without getting distracted, which I think is huge.
15%, that's wild. I would love an extra 15% focus in my life, that's for sure. Were there any other benefits from the research that really stood out to you?
Yeah, definitely. Several studies mentioned a decrease in impulsive behavior, like that I need it now W feeling we were talking about. One study, I think, found that the participants who practiced dopamine fasting were actually less likely to make those impulse purchases online. So it's not just good for maybe your mental well-being, but maybe good for your wallet, too.
Less impulsivity, more focus.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm starting to see the appeal here. But I also remember you mentioning something about feeling less overwhelmed. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think that was a theme that popped up a few times in the research. Like, it seems like when we can create just a little bit of space from all those constant dopamine spikes, it can lead to a greater sense of calm and, just feeling less overwhelmed by everything, by our to-do lists, our inboxes, just all the chaos of life these days.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Sign me up for some of that less overwhelmed life.
Yeah.
But before everybody runs off and throws their phones into the ocean, this article doesn't just like sing dopamine fasting's praises, right? There's got to be another side to this.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You're right. I think it's really important to proceed with caution. I mean, while the benefits sound really intriguing, this literature review also really emphasized how important moderation is and, really avoiding those extreme approaches to dopamine fasting.
Yeah, good old moderation.
Yeah.
It always seems to come back to that in the end, doesn't it? So what are we talking about here when we say extreme dopamine fasting? Like, what's the danger zone?
So imagine completely isolating yourself from any social interaction, depriving yourself of anything that brings you joy, even restricting your diet to the point that you're not getting the nutrients you need. I mean, that's the extreme end. And that can be really detrimental. We're talking about potential negative impacts on mental health, like increased anxiety and feeling lonely and isolated, even potential for disordered eating if food restriction gets out of hand. It's just not a sustainable or healthy way to live for most people.
Yeah, that's a good point. It sounds like with dopamine fasting, like with a lot of things in life, it's about finding that middle ground, that sweet spot where you're challenging yourself without completely depriving yourself.
Yeah.
Because let's be real, who hasn't tried to like completely overhaul their habits overnight, only to totally crash and burn a week later?
Exactly. You got it. It's really about being gradual and figuring out what works best for you, not, what you see some influencer promoting online. And I think this is where I really liked the concept of a dopamine diet.
Dopamine diet. Okay, tell me more. I like where this is going.
Yeah, so just like we make choices about the food that we put in our bodies, we can also be more mindful about the, inputs that we're feeding our brains. It's not about deprivation. It's about making those conscious choices to engage in activities that actually align with our values and our goals.
I see what you're saying. So instead of just cutting things out cold turkey, it's more about adding in more of the good stuff, the things that nourish our minds and our spirits. And this actually ties in really well with this one section in the article that I found fascinating. They called it, get this, the route to a meaningful life. And it's like this whole roadmap for well-being that goes way beyond just restricting things.
Yeah. Figure 1, the route to a meaningful life. I think that's really where this study shines, because it really shifts the focus from deprivation to creation, building a more fulfilling life from the ground up.
So we're not just talking about getting rid of things. We're talking about actually replacing them with something even better. I'm into it. So what are some of the key stops on this route to a meaningful life?
Well, it starts with building up resilience. Think of it like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. Because life, it's going to throw curveballs our way. Resilience is about building that strength to deal with those challenges without always running back to those quick dopamine hits as a coping mechanism.
I like that. It's like building up our strength so we don't have to rely on those external sources of dopamine. So what else is on this route to a meaningful life?
It really focuses on cultivating gratitude and having a more positive outlook in general, because it's so easy to get stuck in that negativity loop, right? Only focusing on what's wrong or what we don't have. But if we can consciously shift our mindset to appreciate all the good, even just the little things, it can make a huge difference. And honestly, I think this is a big part of where that feeling of being less overwhelmed comes in.
Totally. I'm all about the power of gratitude.
For sure.
Like, it might seem simple, but it can be seriously powerful.
Yeah, it's true.
It's like they always say gratitude turns what we have into enough.
Exactly. And it's more than just, trying to think positive thoughts. It's about actually rewiring our brains to focus on the good stuff. And of course, we can't talk about well-being without talking about the basics, like taking care of ourselves, prioritizing sleep, making sure we're eating nutritious food, and just moving our bodies regularly.
Right. It's like you always hear, you can't pour from an empty cup. We've got to take care of the essentials first.
For sure.
Getting enough sleep, eating well, moving our bodies.
Yeah.
That's all crucial for a healthy dopamine system, too.
It's all connected.
So it's less about dopamine fasting then, and more about dopamine flourishing. I love that. But with all this talk about dopamine, are there people who aren't convinced, who think this is just another wellness fad?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
And the article acknowledges that this is still a pretty new area of research. We don't have all the answers yet. Some experts are a little wary of oversimplifying things. The brain is incredibly complex, and dopamine is really just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
That makes sense. Well, we've covered so much ground here. We talked about how dopamine works in our brains, the potential benefits and downsides of dopamine fasting, and this really cool route to a meaningful life. So for our listeners who have been with us this whole time, what would you say is the most important thing to take away from all of this?
I'd say the biggest takeaway is that this is really a journey of self-discovery. What works for one person might not work for another. So it's all about paying attention to how your mind and body respond to different things you try, different practices. It's about finding what that balance looks like for you.
So it's not about following some strict set of rules. It's about tuning into ourselves.
Exactly.
And figuring out what we really need.
Yeah.
Asking ourselves, what gives me energy?
Yeah.
What makes me feel drained?
Exactly.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. Thank you so much for breaking it all down for us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And for everyone listening, if this got you thinking, keep those deep dives going. Experiment with things. See what works for you. And remember, it's all about finding what feels best for you. Until next time, stay curious. Keep learning.
And keep those deep dives going strong.